Donnie Ray Martin III was a 31-year-old from Madison Heights, Michigan. He was an animal lover and worked for a tree trimming company. On August 3, 2017, Donnie went to work as he usually did. After, he was offered a ride home by his brother-in-law. Donnie declined. He said he'd walk instead. He was never seen again. I'm Ed Denzel, and this is Unfound. Lightning. It has to be one of Mother Nature's most beautiful creations. I've gotten to watch it quite a bit since I've moved to my new place. Hey, Tampa is the lightning capital of North America. Look it up. The way the flashes come out of nowhere. The rumbling that marches through our homes shortly after. Then seconds later, another strike, with arcs of electricity spreading out across the sky like roots of a cosmic tree. That these pulses of light are totally natural doesn't seem possible. But they are. Yet lightning can be as damaging as any tornado or hurricane. It's the main cause of forest fires. It can knock out electricity and cell phone networks for hours, if not days. And in the United States, 51 people a year die from being struck. Plus, lightning strikes at random. Yet the chances of being hit are very, very small. Well, in the disappearance of Donnie Martin, I will be interviewing a woman who was figuratively struck by lightning in 1988, when her sister-in-law disappeared. The odds of that happening were very, very low. But now here she is, 30 years later, wondering what happened to another one of her loved ones. And we get to discuss what it's like when lightning strikes again. And now, a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's website, charleyproject.org. Donnie Ray Martin, named after his father, was a salt-of-the-earth type of guy. He loved to laugh and was friendly with everyone. He'd been like that as long as anyone could remember. And he continued to be this way even though his parents divorced early in his life. However, late in his teens and into his 20s, he developed an addiction to pills. Then Donnie shifted to heroin. He tried Vivitrol, rehab, and other methods to beat this addiction, but nothing quite stuck. Yet he managed to hold down a steady job working for his brother-in-law's tree trimming and landscaping business. So on August 3rd, 2017, Donnie was at work like he usually was. However, on this day, everyone was allowed to leave early at 11 a.m. because Donnie's brother-in-law, the owner, was going on a trip that weekend. The brother-in-law offered to give Donnie a ride home, but he declined. Donnie said he was going to get a haircut and he'd walk there. There's no proof Donnie saw a barber that day. He was never seen again. Unlike some of Unfound's recent cases, Donnie's disappearance doesn't have a ton of facts. In addition, due to this case possibly being connected to ongoing investigations in the area, we will only be able to talk about so much during the interview. But the questions can still be asked. Number 1, why didn't anyone see Donnie walking the streets of Madison Heights and Detroit that day after work? Number 2, why have the police allowed local criminals to intimidate Donnie's family and friends during their attempts to find him? And number 3, is Donnie's case connected to other crime in the area, or is it a standalone incident? Donnie's family realizes his addiction could have gotten him into trouble, but they are open to all possibilities. The guest for this episode is Donnie's stepmother, Leslie C. Martin. Unfound News. This episode is being released on July 12, 2019. That means the Dallas Unfound meetup is occurring in 2 days. If you are in the area, I hope you will consider attending. Please find the details in the Unfound podcast discussion group on Facebook. And don't forget, in less than 2 weeks, the Amarillo meetup on July 24th. Next, all the volumes for Season 1 of Unfound are now completed. Shortly, I will be organizing them on Amazon so you can buy them all at the same time for a discount, both printed and ebook editions. I hope you will consider it. And finally, I hope all of you had a chance to take part in the free think tank this past Sunday night. If you didn't, the video is available on Unfound's YouTube channel, all 90 minutes of it. And if you'd like to take part in the think tank permanently, please sign up on Patreon at the $12 a month level or above. Thank you. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, and Facebook. On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on YouTube for the Unfound live show. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound podcast. This week I need to thank Michelle, Paula, Kathy, Concha, Lisa, and Anne. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. Merchandise, the books at Amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Yes, you know about the reviews by now. Shirts at myshopify.com/unfound-podcast. Cards at makeplayingcards.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the stepmother of Donnie Ray Martin III, Leslie C. Martin. Leslie, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this first. I'm talking to you. You are Donnie's stepmother. How are you the one that is kind of the spokesperson? I know that you're out there on social media, getting the word out about Donnie's case. You've chosen to take this on.
Well, unfortunately, our family on my side has been through this before. I have a missing sister-in-law, Julie Lynn C., who disappeared in 1988 out of Daytona Beach, Florida. And while we did not have social media back then, there's still a lot of similarities in how you have to go about a missing person's case.
Right. And the listeners should know that I'm anticipating that we're going to be able to cover Julie's case before the summer is out, working on some things right now. When this first happened, and we're going to get into specifics as we usually do on Unfound, but when this first happened in 2017, was it like, oh no, all over again? Did all those thoughts and feelings and emotions come back from 1988 all over again?
Not right away, because at first I thought, well, it's this is out of character for Donnie not to be home this evening, but he's going to come walking through the door. And then by the next morning, you're concerned. By that night, more concerned. My husband actually made the missing persons report the day after he went missing on a Friday night. So we got out there pretty quick. I still held out hope over that weekend, thinking, he's just gone somewhere to clear his head or whatever. But, when he didn't show up for work on Monday, you definitely know something's wrong. He would not have missed work without calling. And, of course, in the days that followed, the feelings of fear and dread, they get worse.
Right. And did that, being that Julie was your sister-in-law, did the thoughts of her, I'm sure you think about her very often, but when this happened, like you said, on Monday, he doesn't appear again, did you start thinking about her more than you usually do?
Yes, and a lot of people, when we started posting him as, being gone right away. A lot of people were writing about Julie. They'd write underneath the post, and oh gosh, this is you've already been through this before. And I was trying to take not that Julie's not important.
Yeah.
I was trying to take the light off of her because we were dealing with the issue at hand. And then you'd lay in bed at night and think, oh, gosh, you know, we don't want to go through this it had been 28 years at that point. We don't want to go through this for 30 years like we have Julie. That's the first thing that crosses your mind. Lord, you know, let us find him, because we don't want to go through these years of not knowing. And I don't want his mom and dad to ever go through the not knowing as Julie's family and our family has through these years. It's too hard.
Right. And I'm guessing that your husband certainly knew, but did other people in Donnie's biological family know that you had experienced this in 1988? And did they look?
My stepdaughter did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, probably not on his mom's side. No, I would doubt it.
Okay. I'm just wondering if they knew, did they look to you as kind of a rock, being that you've experienced this before? Did they, I
don't know, as looking at me as kind of a rock, where we all have the common goal to just find Donnie. That's the main thing, is just finding him.
Okay. We're going to come back to that maybe at the end. Let's just talk about you and Donnie. You are his stepmother. How old was he when you first met him? Of course, you got married to his father. And tell the listeners about the relationship you had with Donnie.
My husband's name is Donnie also.
Okay.
I met him in 2005, and I met Donnie when he came down for our wedding in 2006. He was about 19 then, and just, a great kid. He was funny. He just had a great personality, made you laugh, and that was our first time meeting. We had a really good time at kind of a brunch the day after the wedding, and then kind of didn't really talk much for a while. And then somehow or another, when Facebook came out a few years later, we were Facebook friends, and we got to talking on Facebook quite a bit. And he was a dog lover. He loved dogs, and I'm a dog lover.
Okay.
And, so we talked about dogs a lot, and we had this little thing about bears. In our area, bears are quite common. And at one point, we had a bear when we were living in Navarre in our backyard, and then one that climbed a tree by the bridge going into Pensacola that was almost like he was waving at the pedestrians going across the bridge. And so we would share bear stories. Every time I see a bear story on social media now, my first thought is, I got to send this one to Donnie, and of course, I can't.
Right.
But just a good personality, and as he got older, he matured, and he had the biggest heart. I mean, just a huge heart. Heart as big as Texas. His nephew was born on his birthday, and that just tickled him pink. His sister's son. He thought that was pretty cool. The last time I saw him was in July, just probably about a week before he disappeared. I was in Michigan, and that was the last time I got to spend any time with Donnie.
Now, the listeners should understand, you live in Florida, not near me. You live up in the Panhandle, as it seems. A lot of my...
not far from Destin.
All right. Former guests of Unfound seem to live up in that area. It's kind of interesting. But how was it that you...
I'm not near the beach anymore. I'm in the woods.
Okay. I know there are woods up, up in the Panhandle. Yeah, it's a little bit different kind of Florida up there compared to where I am. But... how is it that you and his father were in Florida, but he was in Michigan? Had he been in Michigan for many years, or how did you all get separated?
Well, little Donnie lived in Michigan. That's when his mom and dad split up. He was about 9 or 10 years old, and my husband's from here. He's from Defeniak Springs, Florida. He had been in Michigan. Little Donnie had struggled with addiction, and I refer to him as Little Donnie a lot. That's what we all do, Little Donnie and Big Donnie.
Okay.
He had struggled with addiction for a while, and he had been in rehab, had come out of well, I think first he tried the methadone, and then he had been in rehab. When I was there in July, he was supposed to be on Vivitrol. I know he had been for a month or two before that for sure. We're not sure about the month of July. And he was going to try to get some other help when I was there in July. And I believe he had, if I'm not mistaken, he had an appointment coming up right after he disappeared. This appointment had already been made, and of course he never got to go. But he had made efforts to try to get away from heroin.
Okay. And you said that you would communicate with him quite a bit on social media. Would you say that it was every day? And I mean, keeping in contact with him, I guess. Not every day. Usually he was kind of a home person, and when I would talk to him, it would be like in the evening. I live in the woods, and one night these people from somewhere deep in the woods ended up on my dirt road, and they were obviously having a domestic squabble. And little Donnie and I were actually talking about God on Facebook that night in private messenger, and the different things that he believed, the different things I believed, having a really good conversation. And I said, hang on a minute, there's something going on. It was in the spring, and I said, oh my gosh, these people, somebody shot a gun. Donnie, I said, hang on a minute, and I went and got the gun, and little Donnie's like, well, don't go out there. Yeah, right.
I look back on it now, it was kind of funny, and I said, I'm going to get off for a little bit and just call the police and have them come out here and run these people off. But, he would do things like that. He walked me through that day. It was funny. But,
well, you two must have had a really good relationship then.
As little as we saw each other, it was good. I would like to have known him a lot better. A whole lot better. He was a smart guy. He really was a smart person in a lot of ways. And it's just such a shame, it's such a shame, that he started using, because he really could have gone very far.
I guess what I'm saying is, once again, you are a stepmother, and sometimes children and, frankly, just to be honest, the new wife don't get along so well. I mean, that happens in a lot of different relationships, but it sounds like you having conversations with him online and everything, that you knew him quite well and got along with him.
I'm sure he got mad at me there toward the end, because, I definitely sided with his dad as far as, getting help. But, prior to that, we did pretty good, long distance. We did. Like I said, I just wish, we could have spent more time together.
Yeah.
I'm sure all adult kids, I'm old. If my parents were still living and if they got a divorce, I'd probably feel kind of funny about somebody new coming along, and I'm sure most people do. It would take an extraordinary person not to have some reservations, but we did pretty good.
Okay. My understanding is that, and we're going to only use her first name, he had a girlfriend. Her name was Mackenzie. Did you get to meet her? What kind of relationship did those two have?
They hadn't been going out but a couple of months, but they had known each other from when they were younger, actually, so they did know each other. She didn't live very far from his dad. where his dad and Donnie were staying at the time. So little Donnie was over at Mackenzie's quite a bit, and that was kind of tough on her too when he first went missing. She's the first one that reported that he was not at her house that day, which was generally the norm, and that's what kind of got the whole thing going. Something's wrong.
And we're going to talk about that. Did Donnie have any children?
No.
No children. Okay.
No children.
Okay.
Never been married.
Okay, well, I can relate to that. Okay. All right, so he's has this, my understanding then is Mackenzie and he were not living together? They were living separate?
I don't know how to answer that. Sometimes he'd be at his house, sometimes he'd be at Mackenzie's.
Okay. And did Donnie live by himself, or did he have a roommate? What was he doing at the time?
He had stayed at various places where he had roommates before. He had two fairly long-term girlfriends that he had lived with prior to. I don't think he ever lived alone. I'm not sure, but I don't think he ever lived alone.
Okay. Now, you did say that you had seen him in July. Of course, he disappeared. He disappeared in August, but you saw him in July. Did you just go up there?
After I flew back home. Yeah, he was supposed to be trying to get back on the Vivitrol.
Okay, and you were up there. And you were, I guess, with his father, your husband. Were you all there together?
Right. Yes, we're together.
Okay. Was the reason to go up there just to see him, just to hang out for?
Yeah.
Okay. How would you say that Donnie was doing when you saw him? Just once again, I know that you're not a licensed professional in anything, but your impression, knowing him for as many years as you did, how was he doing?
He wasn't doing very well then.
Okay. So he was struggling with his addiction.
Yeah, he was struggling then.
Okay.
The thing about Donnie, if you thought he was using, and his dad would ask him, that day, he would say, no, I haven't. But he would always come back and tell the truth the next day or two. Always the next day or two. And there was a day when I was there where that was the case. And it's just hard.
Yeah. Okay. Did he have a job? Was he, was he a functioning addict? Did he have a job? Was he going to work every day? Or
he had a job. He went to work every day. Actually worked for his brother-in-law, and never missed work.
Did the brother-in-law? So that would be Donnie's sister's husband.
Right.
That worked. Okay. Okay. So and it was in a tree service. Kind of tree trimming and keeping like landscaping or something like that.
Right.
Okay. So you saw him not long before. I'm guessing you were worried about him. I know his father, of course, was worried about him. He was on the Vivitrol, but it still seemed that wasn't helping that much.
Well, we don't think he was on the Vivitrol in July.
Okay. So the last time, and did you talk to him, or did your husband talk to him any times after you came back from Michigan?
Yeah, he saw him. I think he gave him a ride somewhere. I can't remember right offhand where, but he gave him a ride somewhere. And that, I believe, was the last time he saw him.
Okay.
He was going to go, I believe, take him to his counseling appointment the following week, if I remember right. And, of course, that never happened.
Okay. So my understanding, though, that you live in Florida, and you and Donnie's father live together, correct?
We did until all this started happening with little Donnie. But once we learned of what was going on, and he was using heroin, which was in the winter of 2016, things really, really changed.
Okay. And so Donnie's dad stayed up there, and you were in Florida.
Right.
And
We've gone back and forth.
Okay. And you're saying that the last time that Donnie's father saw him was he was taking him somewhere.
Yeah, it was right before he disappeared.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on to this. Let's talk about what do you know, what have you found out about that day of August 3rd, 2017? What have you learned about it?
Well, they got off of work early that day. His brother-in-law, they were working a half day that day. They were going to be off on Friday, and because I believe they were going out of town. And I want to say they got off around 10:30, 11 that day, and Donnie took off on foot, and he was asked by his brother-in-law if he needed a ride, and he said no, he was going to go get a haircut, and that's the last time he was seen.
When you say 10:30, 11, you mean in the morning or the night?
In the morning.
In the morning. Okay, in the morning. So they must have started very early in the morning to be getting off work.
Right.
Okay. Was that usual to way you understand the work that they did and their work schedule? Was it usual for them to get off that early, or?
No, it was just because they were going out of town. So
Okay.
they were working a short day that day.
Okay. And the way you understand it, once again, looking for anything that is maybe out of character for Donnie, and that's what we do in any of these cases. Was it usual that the brother-in-law would give him a ride home, or would you say that was
Sometimes
something
he did.
unique?
Yeah, sometimes he did give him a ride home quite often. But he declined it that day, said he wanted to get his hair cut. What was so out of character for him was maybe not coming in right away, but he was always back home in the evening, either at Mackenzie's, or, the other house. And he didn't contact anybody, nothing, nothing. And that was extremely out of character.
And the way you understand it, has this haircut place ever been, barbershop, whatever, ever been identified as to where he could have been going?
Yeah, I think they checked. I'm pretty sure they checked, and he had never gone for a haircut.
All right, so he's at work. He turns down a ride from his brother-in-law, which maybe sometimes he does that, maybe sometimes he doesn't. And the way I understand this area of Madison Heights, rough area?
Not where they were working, I don't believe, but he took off going toward State Fair, that whole 8-mile area down there. And that is very rough.
And when you say 8 Mile, that's the name of a road. I'm sure a lot of people are going to know it because of
the movie. People will know
the movie 8 Mile with Eminem. This is the area we're talking about.
A rough area: drugs, prostitution, abandoned houses, trap houses. It's a bad area.
Okay. When was the first time? And you mentioned already a little bit. We'll talk about it again. Who was the first person? When did this happen that somebody said, you know what? Where's Donnie? How do you remember it? Mackenzie was. Okay, explain what happened. What'd she do?
She called Donnie's dad, and I believe she called Donnie's sister trying to find out. I can't remember all that, but I know she was calling Donnie's dad. The whole thing is little Donnie would never have just taken off without letting his mom know. She had not been feeling well. He would never do that to her. They were extremely close.
Was this a situation where maybe Mackenzie tried calling him and he didn't pick up, or maybe she went over to
calling and texting.
Okay, was that
and not hearing back from him, and that was not the norm.
Of course. Did that happen on August 3rd, or do you think it took a couple days for that to happen?
No. She was trying to get a hold of him, right away.
Wow. Okay.
So right away, already she knows something is up on the evening of August 3rd because she can't reach him.
She can't reach him. He doesn't show up. His dad hasn't heard from him. His sister hasn't heard from him. No one's heard from him.
Okay. What did they do? Did they call the police? Did they go over to his place? And once again, listeners have to remember you're in Florida at this time, so you know
Right.
you just know of what was told to you afterwards. And we'll get into how you found. Please.
Yeah, I think they all just kept trying to call him and text him, and were trying to reach him that way at first. And then by Friday night, I think it was around, Michigan's an hour ahead of here. I think it was around 8 or 9 o'clock Friday night. My husband went to the police station. He reported it in Madison Heights because Donnie had left from Madison Heights. So that's where the initial missing persons report was filed.
Okay. Do you know if Mackenzie or Donnie's dad ever went over to his place or wherever he was staying at the time to see if...
Well, that would be Donnie's dad or Mackenzie's. Donnie were staying at his sister's old house where all of his stuff is and still is to this day. You walk by the bedroom, all of little Donnie's things are in there. So, yeah, he hadn't returned home, or he didn't have anything with him when he left.
Okay, so there was no sign that he ever made it home that day. It seems like he walked off, said he was going to get a haircut, and
was vanished. Poof, never seen again.
Okay. So when you say Friday night, that would be August 4th.
Right.
What do the police do? We hear, of course, a lot of these types of cases, whether it is men or women, that, you know, if the police find out, maybe if the person is an addict or has had any run-ins with the law or anything, we're not saying that's in Donnie's case, but just as an example, the police sometimes often want to blow it off. They want to say, oh, the person will be back in a couple days. Is it, in your assessment, did they take it seriously? Did the police do anything?
I don't think they did at first. And let's see, my husband, the detective that was assigned the case ended up really working well later on down the road. He never came to the house to meet my husband. He did go to Mackenzie's to question her pretty early on, and my husband finally called the chief in Madison Heights and said, you know, I want a meeting with the detective. And he got one, and once they established a rapport, then they started, you know, working the case, it seemed. There was a search by the family within, I think it was the second weekend Donnie was gone, if I'm not mistaken. And then within a couple of 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know so much that it was a search to look for Donnie as it was a pre-planned drug raid in that area.
Oh.
But they did go out. I think they had like 40 policemen. They covered an area. They were supposed to have had cadaver dogs with them. And there was a search then. It's a little complicated in Donnie's case. I may be getting ahead of where you want to be, but the missing persons report was filed in Madison Heights. They got on his phone right away, and the phone pinged from that rough area actually in Detroit, which is just a short hike away. And so Detroit works the case also. So it's kind of complicated. There's Sergeant Shannon Jones, which is with Violent Crimes, Homicide, and Missing Persons out of Wayne County. She has Donnie's case. And Greg Hartunian, who my husband worked pretty good with, was the initial detective on Donnie's case. But this past spring, it was handed over to a new detective because Detective Hartunian was promoted. Now Detective Steve Schramm has the case, and my husband has not met him yet.
Okay. All right, so we have a jurisdictional issue here between this, and maybe we'll get into more of that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But how did you find out that Donnie was missing?
My husband.
He called you and told you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I also talked to Mackenzie, and Mackenzie was, letting me know that he hadn't come in that night and what have you. She hadn't heard from him. So,
okay.
And like I said at first, I thought, well, they're off work tomorrow. He'll come in. He'll come in, and it just didn't happen.
Okay. So the police, it does sound like they did something eventually.
Yeah.
Eventually.
I don't
but
think there was a sense of urgency that first few days, but everybody, one of Donnie's cousins on his mom's side posted a flyer, and I think by the second or third week, we did NAMUS. I remember being on the phone from here with Donnie, my husband, and asking all the questions that we had to have for NAMUS. Definitely getting Donnie on NAMUS and just repeatedly posting on the hundreds of missing person sites and podcasts that there are, that he was missing. And so we got him out there really fast. There's a Facebook page called Detroit Metro Crime and Homicide with, almost 100,000 people on this site in Detroit. Everybody is on that site. The criminals are on that site. Everybody watches that site.
Yeah.
And they were just absolutely awesome, posting Donnie's flyers for us every couple of days. So, the word was out there, and flyers were being hung all over the place, and, the family was on it really fast.
Okay. And you did say that there was some sort of raid at some point in that area. Okay.
When they did that, what was supposed to be the search, I think they raided 5 homes down there for drugs.
Would that have been
a little Donnie?
Would that have been close to where Donnie would have been walking through if he was walking to get a haircut or walking home?
It's in the area that his phone last pinged from, the rough area.
Okay. Let's talk about that area. You eventually did go up to Michigan to assist. So when you went up to Detroit, you actually had some scary experiences. Why don't you tell the listeners about it?
It wasn't really scary. I'm a strong person of faith, and I never got scared. I could see where, some people might, but there was a person that the first family search had acted very interested in what was going on, I guess, and then the second search actually threatened the searchers. He and some of his friends got face-to-face, literally, with my stepdaughter in the street, and then this same person drove up during the search. That Crime Stoppers had done a search kind of spearheaded by Dino Williams in Detroit, and he drove up, I believe it was right before the press conference began, but kind of in an intimidating way with guns in the car. And in other words, it was, this is our street, stay off of our street.
And what street was this?
Really probably shouldn't say.
Okay. All right, but it
shouldn't say.
Okay, but it was in that, what you're saying, that 8 Mile area that you described before? It was in that area? Okay.
Yeah, that area.
Okay. And you also told me that you were putting flyers up, somebody was ripping them down, and
when the family was first hanging up the flyers, my stepdaughter and husband going out and putting flyers up, and friends, they would put the flyers up and go back a short time later, and they'd be ripped down from the telephone poles, from the little what they call party stores there, what we call Tom Thumb and 7-Eleven here. They would hang them up, and then people would come and rip them down, like within no time at all.
Mm-hmm.
And there was actually a newscast done in Detroit on WXYZ by Andrea Isom that covered the flyers being taken down.
Okay. And listeners should know that there's a particular person that you said can't mention his name. You said there's a particular person, but we're not going to mention his name for a few different reasons. To keep the integrity going in this case. What could the police do anything about this? This guy and others riding around, guns being shown from their cars, which whether they're pointing them at you or not is, I think, illegal. Police couldn't do anything about any of this while you were doing this, or what did they say? Did you tell them about it? How did they react?
There was a phone call made right. There was so much going on right before the press conference, and my husband told me later there was an officer that came, but I think he was, for lack of a better word, like a rent-a-cop that came and sat at the end of the road.
Mm-hmm. So even though these guys were doing these things, none of them were ever arrested for intimidation, anything like that at all?
No.
Okay. Are you surprised by that? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, you sure couldn't get away with it in the South. That's all I can say.
Okay.
I was surprised. I was surprised because I felt like that certainly warranted being arrested.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Especially
I agree
when
with
I heard, what he had done, to my stepdaughter and husband. Definitely. And then the intimidation thing, they didn't really threaten or anything, but, what they implied was obvious.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess what the law is in many states, not all states, but many states, is that, to just have a gun in a car, if you're sitting there, it's called brandishing. A weapon, even if you're not, intimidation, and that usually is against the law. Obviously, there are states that have concealed carry laws, which are allowed to hide the gun on your person. But if you're openly displaying a gun many places, that is illegal, especially if it's being used in intimidation, even if it's not pointed at somebody and they didn't do anything.
Correct.
All right. Okay. When you first found out about Donnie's disappearance, of course, you thought he was going to come back, but as this continued all, did you, once again, you personally, did you think that it could have something to do with his addiction?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a suspicion that you had that maybe after work he was going to get drugs somewhere, and maybe something?
That's what I thought. Yeah,
okay.
That's what I thought.
Okay. And could these raids that were done be associated with that?
I don't know. I think the raids were probably planned well in advance of Donnie's disappearance, and they just used it as an opportunity to look for him, perhaps, while they were there. When you go through someone you know in your family or a friend, even, I suppose, that disappears like this, you can speculate until pigs fly.
Sure.
It's just, we have.
I know.
And then you quit because this isn't doing any good at all to sit here and speculate. My fear, because Donnie was honest about his addiction, he was honest. When I was there in April of 2017, and we talked a good bit about it then, I knew that when he did go there, that most of the time he would use while he was down there and not come home until, I guess, the better part of it had worn off. My fear to this day is that he overdosed.
Yeah, it's always a suspicion, as you would know, or as you would guess. I cover a lot of cases where drugs come up,
Right.
and
I don't see him taken off.
yeah, and it's always hard to figure out if did the person overdose? Was the person given a hot shot? Of course, like for example, too much fentanyl in it. Was there something?
That was my first fear.
Yeah.
That was my first fear.
Yeah.
And like I said, he never would have left and done that to his mom.
Okay, let's talk about his girlfriend Mackenzie. Once again, we're not using her last name. You got to know her, and what has she said? How did she react to this disappearance? I know that you said she's been somewhat helpful in this, but has she ever offered up? I mean, what have your conversations been, if you can say?
Horribly upset in those first weeks that he disappeared, literally non-functional, upset, and but I think she's doing better now.
Okay. Does she ever offer up? Once again, if you can say, does she feel like you that this could be drug related, or?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And she was the first one who kind of rang the alarm, as far as not being able to. Did she ever go out maybe I know this would be dangerous, but go out by herself to try to ride around and find him? Did she and Donnie's father, do any of this? Even know where to look.
Yes, up and down that whole area, the side streets, and then from the minute that we started putting posters out online, the flyers out online. One time, some woman wrote me and said she had seen Donnie at this seedy motel, which turned out not to be true at all. But she's directing me to this place while I'm on the phone with my husband. I'm online with her. You learn to take all this with a grain of salt eventually. But my husband got to the area and he said, I'm not feeling good about this. And I said, neither am I. I think this is a setup.
Mm-hmm.
So he left. We got a lot of that in the beginning. We still get that. People will say, and not as much as in that first 6 months. Anytime somebody wrote me, and my number is on, so we use that for our ministry's number as well, so people can call here too, which is not advisable. I have no choice to have the same number as I do for the ministry, but calling, private messaging, we just saw him here, we just saw him there. My husband would jump in his car and go down and look, and it would turn out to be not Donnie. And once in a while that'll still happen, and of course, we wish it was, but it's not him. But yeah, Mackenzie looked for him. She went out looking for him with friends. She went out looking for him. She assisted in one of the searches with the family.
Okay, good. Maybe we should ask you this. If Donnie's plan was, let's just say, he said he was going to get a haircut, maybe he was going to get a haircut, maybe, and go get drugs, we don't know. But if he was, how far would the walk have been from where he was that day to where he was staying at the time? How many miles would you say?
Sometimes he took a bus and sometimes he walked it. I want to say I may be wrong because I'm horrible with that area.
Okay.
Maybe about 5 miles would be my guess. Of course, we don't know if he really went to get a haircut. Obviously he didn't because, the place he normally went to had not seen him. But, you're not going to look at somebody and say, I've got to go get my drugs. So maybe he was just saying he was going to get a haircut. I don't know.
It's a very good possibility, I guess.
Right.
My thing is that obviously there was these sightings. You believe at least most of them, if not all of them. were bogus, not true. But on that day, August 3rd, it's a 5-mile walk. It might even have been a couple miles between where he was, and if he was even going to get drugs, whether it was 8 Mile or somewhere else. No credible sightings of him that day, even though it was like 11 o'clock in the morning and there'd be people driving and everything.
Nothing.
Oh, okay.
But it's really hard when you're there. Like the last time I was there, we drove around that area, and of course people were starting to wear jackets then, which is hard for us to imagine here. But when you're looking at people walking the streets, you know, with hoodies on and stuff, they all start to look alike. You know, everybody starts to look alike. You'll feel your heart jump a little, you know, oh, that could, you know, that looks like him, and you get up close and it's not. So, and that's such an oppressed area. I just, you know, I don't see where people probably even really pay that much attention.
Okay. Any video cameras once again in that area that the police could have gotten?
Well, over where he's at, there, you know, where he was supposed to have been out, there's no cameras.
No. Okay.
Yeah, that area is pretty well closed down.
Okay. You had mentioned the phone before. Let's talk about it a little bit. You said that it had pinged in what area, and how far would this area have been from where the work was the work was that day?
Area in Detroit, yeah. He was already down in that, what I call the hood area. When they pinged his, that's the last place his phone pinged from.
Okay. Do you know what time that was?
I'm not sure about the time. It was the day he went missing. The phone started answering. You know, it went straight to voicemail. So the phone was done away with pretty quick, it sounds like.
Okay, so...
And when you're searching down there, when you're doing a search, there's crushed up phones everywhere.
Okay. So maybe if we can put some of these facts together, that he was at work, brother-in-law offers to give him a ride. He says he's doesn't need the ride. He's going to walk to get a haircut. We don't know if that's true or not. Of course, no barber has come forward to say that he saw him that day. And then at some point after that, Donnie's phone pings in another area miles away, someplace that he could have walked. Okay. And I have to ask this, did he make any calls after he left work that day?
He did, and I can't talk about it.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Okay. I know you can't because of the ongoing investigation.
Right.
But he did make one call, and you know who that person is.
I probably shouldn't answer that.
Okay.
I don't want to mess anything up.
Okay. I understand. Once again, listeners have to understand this is a disappearance that is not quite 2 years old, and we run into these types of things with newer cases where there's new information coming out all the time. Whereas in other cases, just to be honest, like with Julie's case, 31 years old, it's a little different. You know, it's a little different, at least with my experience and the way we handle things on this program, where 30 years later, of course, unfortunately, there isn't breaking news much. Whereas these newer cases, 2017, we just covered a case from 2018. It's a little bit different. All right. So, but he did make a call after he left work that day. Okay. Okay. The jurisdictional issues, let's come back to that. We have to explain that again. Madison Heights is where he was, and then because of the ping, that ends up in the actual jurisdiction of, I guess, Detroit or Detroit, depending on how you pronounce it. In your opinion, how have these two different departments worked together? What have you noticed?
I think since they have formed a new task force in the area that I believe came to pass at the end of last year, I think they're working a lot better together. However, Madison Heights cannot go into that jurisdiction. of Detroit. They can talk to people, question people, excuse me, that are in the Madison Heights area, but they can't go down there and actively look, for anything that has to do with little Donnie, or even question people, is our understanding, what we've been told, directly in the Detroit, Wayne County area. So, to me, that's kind of a hindrance. I would like to see that change, but, chances are it won't. But that seemed to kind of put a lot of walls up in the beginning when we would get a lead. Well, I can't go down there. So then you've got to call another department or email another department. It was really hard. So you learn real quick just to send your tips to both jurisdictions that you're getting in.
I ask about the jurisdictional issues because the listeners know that we run into it quite a bit, where the person who went missing lives in one area, where they went missing is another area, and the jurisdiction where they went missing says, no, you have to go file the missing persons report where the person lives, and the department where the person lives says, no, you have to go file the missing persons report where they disappeared. And it's like hot potato, and neither one wants to take credit, wants to take responsibility for it. I'm just wondering, did you sense any of that in Donnie's case?
In the beginning, that's how we felt. But I think that, like I said, since this task force has been formed, I think all the jurisdictions are working together a lot better now. I don't think they're still allowed to go into a jurisdiction that's not their own, but I think there's better communication. There's been better communication for my husband, I think, with Wayne County, and they've responded better, gotten back to him quicker. So it seems like things have changed for the better in the last several months. It's real frustrating when you have a missing person. Even in my sister-in-law's case, trying to get a hold of somebody, that's got the cold case unit or whatever, and as cold as hers is, sometimes that's just next to impossible. You can ask questions, and it's forever before somebody gets back to you. So it's real hard in cases. It's even been harder in Donnie's because of the two jurisdictions, but I do believe that they're communicating better now.
Okay. Well, that's that's good to hear. When you say task force, can you say what this task force is centering on?
I probably shouldn't.
Okay. All right. Once again, listeners are just going to have to understand that there's just some certain things we can't talk about in this disappearance due to things that are ongoing. But as you said, there is a task force that is going on in the area at the time. But that's all we're going to say.
All over. It's not just in that area. It's all over the different counties.
Okay. All right. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay.
Right.
Now, as is usual, also with cases that could, we don't know if it does, but it could involve addiction and drugs. You've heard a lot of rumors, and we're not going to entertain those rumors, because I've learned when you start entertaining rumors, then it just generates more rumors, because people don't love to have their stories told. Do you know where they're coming from? Have you personally gotten them? Can you talk about that? Because you and I have talked about some rumors and things that you heard and everything. Where did they come from? Do you have any idea?
They come from people on the street, and I don't care what size town you live in. And this is no disrespect for people with addictions, because our ministry works with people with addictions constantly. None whatsoever. That's kind of my heart and where my passion lies. But even in a small town like I'm in, and you can tell a whole lot, that's social media is a pain in the back end, but it's also an awesome tool.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look really hard at a friends list, all of the addicts, all the people with drug problems, they're all friends just about.
Yeah.
Whether they know each other from drug use on the street, from rehab, from meetings, they're friends. And it's the same way in Detroit, the exact same way. So while sometimes drug use, well, it definitely alienates people from, they start staying away from their loved ones. They start staying away from their good friends. They lose friends, you know, their original close friends that don't use. They're still friends with other addicts. And most of this that I get has come from other addicts. Some of them are no longer using now. Some are in active use. A lot of it's hearsay, things they have heard on the streets.
Yeah.
And some of it has come from girls that are on the street a lot. I don't probably need to elaborate. And just rumor, you know, just rumors that they have heard, but nobody really knows. Everybody hears all these things, but nobody can tell us where he is. And then the thing that we have heard is he overdosed somewhere, but they don't know where.
Yeah. Right. And as you've told me in a prior conversation, is that you know, in any rumor there might be a kernel of truth in it, and it's trying to figure out, you know, what part of that is the truth and what part of it is the lie.
I hope not, and I hope so.
Yes.
I don't like the word closure, because when you lose a family member this way, there's no closure. But for answers, you know, I hope so.
Yes. Right.
I would love it if he just popped up somewhere and said, you know, I'd had enough of everything and everybody. I got away and come back clean. That would be just awesome. Just wonderful. You know, that, of course, when you don't have the person, when you don't have an answer, there's always that glimmer of hope that just maybe. But when you've heard so much hearsay, you know, it's hard to keep that positive attitude, especially after 2 years.
Would you say that the hearsay and the rumors have slowed down in the last, since maybe a year ago, being we're coming up with the 2-year anniversary? Have they slowed down, or are they just as bad as ever?
Yeah, you know, and you can tell, just like, well, of course, there was no social media when my sister-in-law disappeared. That was strictly newspaper, television, and hanging up flyers back in 1988. With the Internet, when you first start sharing somebody now, they get plastered, especially if it's a female, or if it's a high-profile male case. And we kept Donnie out there so good, and I think we still do in the beginning, that he was just everywhere. And yeah, you know, stuff was coming in, you know, like I said, usually wrong information, but it was coming. And now there's not quite as many shares. Now there's not as many leads or tips coming in. And from what I understand, there's nothing coming into Crime Stoppers at the moment either. He is on Crime Stoppers, and there is a reward on Crime Stoppers, and that's pretty well gone cold too.
Okay. Yeah, I it's funny you say that. Well, it's not funny. That's my experience, I should say, that 2-year mark seems to be a big deal. The 1-year mark sometimes, but you can start getting to 2 years is when things, you know, really, to me, my feeling, once again, 130 cases, it starts to really get cold. You know, if it's like, if a disappearance isn't solved, whatever it is, if it's a murder, a suicide, or whatever else, if it's not resolved within a couple years, unfortunately, the odds get very great that it might be a while. It
Yeah.
seems. It seems.
And then you get told things that are really hard, like we've been told by the Detective Hartunian, but he was, telling the truth, that his hope at that point was somebody would stumble into an abandoned house and stumble upon Donnie. There's so many down there, or up there, so many abandoned homes. And so then you just pray and you hold out on the hope that maybe someone will find him.
Yeah. Right.
And it's scary when you're doing a search because you have in your mind, while you're picking up a stick and turning over tires and mattresses and weeding through the used needles and the garbage, if you do flip something over and you do find someone and there's clothes left that might be that person, you actually have in your head a plan because you're worried about others that are in the search that would affect for a lifetime. And so, you've got your phone and you've got to call 911 and then be very quiet about what you've done. That was in my head the whole time we were searching. You hope you find them and you hope you don't.
Yeah. Yep. It's for the couple of cases that I've covered where remains have been found. You're right. It's both good news and bad news.
Right.
Yeah. Certainly true. We began this conversation talking about how this had happened to you before. Of course, her name has come up a couple times in the past hour. Julie C., your sister-in-law. She was married to your brother back in 1988 when she disappeared. And it should be known for the record that your brother is not a person of interest or a suspect in her disappearance at all. We need to state that for the record.
They were divorced at the time, and it hadn't been divorced very long at all.
Okay.
And we're in the process of getting back together. And he has remarried and has more children. And
right, and he was and he was nowhere in there, and he was nowhere near where she was when when she disappeared. But you've experienced this before, and it's tough enough to go through it once. What's it like to go through it twice 30 years later?
Oh, all that goes through my mind is please don't let it take as long. The thing that's hard about my sister-in-law is I was 30 when or just turned 31 when she disappeared. I'm 61 now. And my time's drawing near. It is probably. I'd like to say I'd live another 30 or 40 years, but I may not. And I would, for her boys that are grown men now, I would love to be able to put their mom to rest. And for us to be able to say goodbye, it's so hard when someone's been a part of your life and alive and real in your life, and they just vanish, and you don't even get a chance to send them off in peace. That's the hardest thing. People don't get a chance to say goodbye.
Yeah. And I think that it's fairly unique for you because maybe the listeners have already gotten this idea. I don't know are you a pastor, a reverend? How would you classify yourself?
Pastor of a church called Front Porch Ministries, and we do a lot with the homeless, a lot with the addicts, a lot with the poverty-stricken. So these are situations, not missing people, but drug use that I see. I did talk to a young man not too long ago that hadn't called home in 7 years, and I hope when I left I had convinced him to contact his family. We're not going to get in their business and do it for them. And the chances of them giving us their real name are slim anyway. So I hate to see other families go through this. Every missing person that comes across my Facebook page, I honestly say a prayer for, because you feel for the families so badly.
being that you've now experienced this twice, once again, with your faith, do you think that you handle it different than people maybe who are in your unique position? Because, of course, as you know, there are a lot of people believe in the power of prayer and thoughts and prayers to people that have unfortunate things happen to them, whether it's disappearances or illnesses and everything. Do you think you handled it different? Do you think you have it handled a little differently, being that in your position?
I have. Yeah, I know I have. Now, I believed in God when my sister-in-law disappeared. I went to church, but I was nowhere near where I am in my walk now. And it makes a tremendous difference. With Julie, it was just, it was hard. Like I said, there was no internet. We didn't have what we have now. My mom did a whole lot of this until she passed away in 2006. You jump to conclusions more. You act without thinking more. I think when you don't have the faith, you're way more emotional, if that makes sense. When you're strong in faith, you're able to stop and pray about it and think about it and get that guidance and that stability to be on even ground so that you can contend with it. I'm not going to say I've not ever cried over either one of them with some of the things we've heard about Donnie's disappearance, one afternoon. I can't say what it was, but I literally dropped to my knees in my bedroom. I was like, no, Lord, please, help guide us the right way. It does make a big difference. I cannot imagine. I know how it feels with him being my stepson. I can't imagine what a parent, a blood parent, must go through when their child's missing, because this is extremely difficult.
Right. I know that, of course, many of my guests are believers. I think most of them are Christians of one type or another, Catholic or Protestant or whatever. And, we've off the record, we've talked about, how their faith has gotten them through this, but also, they start wondering, why does this happen to them? And, there's no easy answer for that, is there?
No. You just have to trust God. You have to trust God, and you have to turn it over to Him. That's the hardest part that I think, we as mortal human beings have, is letting go and turning it over to Him and asking Him, when you get up in the morning, okay, what can I do today to help bring Donnie home? What can I do today to help bring Julie home? And you just keep plugging.
Right. Yeah, I think that once again, in your position, you can offer very good insight, unique insight into that, and I appreciate you doing that.
Oh, thank you.
One more point about all of this, being that you had to experience this in 1988, you experienced it in 2017. Your perception, are things better with missing persons cases now? Do you think that they're getting handled better than back then? Obviously, we've talked about social media, et cetera, but what do you think?
I think so. I think now definitely, because they can reach people so much easier, and it's crazy. People put so much out there on social media, on their Twitter accounts, their Facebook accounts, their Instagrams. You can kind of figure out a whole lot that's going on with people that way.
Mm-hmm.
And
right, that's certainly true.
It becomes almost addicting when you, especially in the beginning nowadays, when you start trying to figure out, people and places and stuff, because you'll be, that first 6 months, I actually wore out a laptop. You're just 24/7. You go to bed doing it, you wake up doing it, and to the point where, you've got to, some days I just have to take a break from it all because it gets very, very overwhelming. So I might take a break for 2 or 3 days, and then I come back. Yeah.
Right. I know that it's interesting you talk about social media. I know that I've used it to find, and my assistants, Cherie, Emily, other people have used it to find people to talk to, people who knew the missing person, and also we've used it to check out persons of interest, and see what they were talking about at the time on their account when the person went missing. We use social media for all sorts of different reasons, trying to get more insight. I'm sure that's what you were doing as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Constantly.
Yeah. Speaking of social media, do you have, or do you or somebody have a page set up for Donnie? And if so, for Julie too, being that she was mentioned here, once again, for the listeners, we're going to devote an entire episode to Julie, hopefully, once again, before the summer is over. But is there a page set up for those two?
Yes, there is. Donnie's cousin set one up. I believe it's called Help Find Donnie Martin or Find Donnie Martin. And then there is a Help the Cause Find Donnie Martin that was set up by a friend of his sister's, Linda.
Okay.
Julie has one that's Find Julie Braswell C. And the story, the whole story's on there. There were some other girls that went missing close to the same time period from there, and then all of those girls are on there too. So
that's true, and that's once again something that we're going to continue to look into. And so hopefully, when we do our interview for that, and the listeners should know that you will be the interview for Julie's case as well somewhere down the road. That of course we will talk about those other cases that we'll see if they're connected or not. We're just not sure right at this second, but we certainly will talk about.
And there's a whole lot when you Google Donnie's name. Gosh, I think he's been on the news. I know my husband's done 4 or 5 newscasts on him. His sister has done one. Missing in Michigan did 2 recently. Of course, Mary Cross has passed away. She was just an invaluable, she helped so much with little Donnie. So there's a lot of resources out there, that if people want to know his story, they can look.
Okay. Any last words before we complete this interview, Leslie?
Just God bless anyone that has a missing family member or a murdered family member that there's no answers for yet. It's a tough road to go down.
Leslie, thank you for being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you very much.
Okay, talk to you soon regarding Julie. Thank you for being on this episode.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that was my interview with Leslie C. Martin, stepmother of Donnie Martin III. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. You will be hearing from her again soon when Unfound covers the disappearance of her sister-in-law, Julie C. I'm sure you got the feeling there is more Leslie and I could have talked about during this interview. Well, your feelings are true. For example, Donnie made a call after he left work. Leslie knows the person he called. However, she is under explicit instructions to not reveal who this person is. And there are a few other topics Leslie couldn't talk about. These types of situations always put me in a tough position. I want the most information released to the public as possible. However, I can't make my guests say things they don't want to reveal, especially if they've been instructed to keep certain items a secret. And I don't want to automatically decline to cover a case just because the guest won't be as revealing as I'd like. I'm not sure where the line is when I say to a guest, I don't really think you're giving the public enough information so that they can help you, but I don't think we even came close to it in this case, despite a few facts being withheld. Because at its essence, the disappearance of Donnie Martin is much like some we've covered, where there isn't a lot of information. Ronnie Russell, Jason Jolkowski, Lucas Degerness, Bonnie Joseph. And still, we certainly raise the profile of those cases, and that's how they will all get solved. Frankly, I think if some of you start to really dig into Donnie's case, you'll discover on your own some of the information Leslie couldn't reveal. So please give it a shot, especially those of you in the Detroit area. As for the facts that were discussed in this interview, and given what we know about Donnie, it's hard not to think that this is another drug case. And with every drug case, we're always left with two choices. Did somebody give Donnie a hot shot, or did some sort of overdose accident happen, and then somebody disposed of him? Frankly, I don't think there's enough information to determine that. And that's not because of Leslie holding anything back. It's because disappearances involving drugs are so tough to reason out. Think of how many cases we've covered where we're asking the same question. Was it intentional or an accident? We do that often in these drug cases. What may persuade you one direction or the other is if you were to go on NAMUS to figure out if there are any other disappearances in the area similar to Donnie's. You may want to do that. Regarding Leslie dealing with Donnie's disappearance, nobody thinks an unsolved disappearance will happen in their family. Then it does. And for Leslie, it happened again. And you heard her talk about what that's been like. You'll get to hear Leslie sometime soon when we talk about the disappearance of her sister-in-law, Julie. And at that time, Leslie and I will discuss the first time lightning struck. I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.